Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons like diamonds and
Hey, Luke
co-partner
Simons.
Luke Simons like diamonds. We're here to talk about three simple tricks to catch saltwater fish. We're talking about redfish, speckled trout, snook, flounder, mangrove snapper, etc. in the wintertime. Both got our little hoodies on. Got my thick
No hoodie.
Carhartt. You got, I guess, no hoodie on yours. You're a little Columbia. You've had that for a long time, dude.
It was Old Faithful. This is
Mm.
actually one of our first videos when we took Chris Olt out when he won that tournament from like literally first year Salt Strong. I was wearing this and outfished you for my recollection. So it's been good luck
You've
ever
been
since.
sporting the heck out of that thing for a decade. Congrats. Um, Probably still got the same underwear and socks too.
Can't argue against that.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Well, onward and upward here. So let's talk about wintertime. We had probably one of the worst misconceptions, right? That fish just don't bite in the winter. They got lockjaw. We kind of gave up in the winter and thought you could only catch an inshore slam or saltwater fish in the summertime in spring and fall, but winter was just like no go. We didn't even attempt it. So let's talk about that. Talk about a couple of misconceptions, and we'll talk about these three simple tips on where to be fishing because it's all about the where.
Yeah, so we use the term lockjaw. Like when I remember when a cold front came through and we didn't catch any fish, we're like, oh, it was they had lockjaw. They just weren't biting today. And then now, 20 years later, after finally, learning fish behavior and what happens, now winter's my favorite. And even after cold fronts are awesome. I absolutely love it. Because they're just super easy to predict where they're going to be. Obviously, yes, they're going to be more lethargic and we're going to talk about that, but they're also very predictable on whether fish are not smart. All they're doing is they're reacting to the changing environment. And if we understand how they react to the changing environment, then it's very easy to know what they're going to do. It's like the for those computer people, it's zeros and ones, right? Understand how things, see what the environment's doing, know how the fish react to it, and boom, you're going to put yourself in the right spot at the right time. So, what should we dive in first?
Well,
Dive
let's
into
talk
first.
about one more too. And I'm talking about thinking about the spots because we're going to talk about where to find the fish. But in general, your summer spots, like meaning the spots that you have the best luck in summer, are not where you're going to go find them in the winter. That was another big issue we had is we just kept fishing the same handful of spots. I think it's probably the biggest mistake most anglers make is just keep fishing the same spots all year long, even within smart fishing spots. I mean, you'll start to see some of these spots move drastically, from some of the summer spots into some of the creeks and more wind protected areas. So just keep that in the back of your head that the spots where you are crushing it in the middle of the summer or late summer are not going to be the same ones that you're going to crush it in winter in general. So
Yeah, and yeah, there's just the spectrum, and we have in the fishing school we talk about the spectrum, and it's really the hot versus cold, that spectrum on the outside. So the summer and winter, the fish are going to be in very different spots. It's very rare when a really good spot is good in both, like when one spot is really good during both summer and winter, and then this fall and spring are kind of in the middle, and those spots are going to be different as well. And that's really a lot of that depends on where the food is. But so diving into winter. What we know is that fish are cold-blooded, right? Just to go back to super basics. And that means that they cannot, it's not like us, like our bodies can actually moderate itself. So fish can't control their body temperature. All they can do is swim, all they can do is move to water that's more comfortable for them. And when we're in the cold spectrum, and that's relative, right? A cold day in North Carolina is different than a cold day here in Florida, but the fish are basically climatized. So like, once it gets colder than the norm, regardless of the species, I don't care. I don't even, I stopped looking at water temperature on my depth finder because it led me astray. I just literally think about cold and hot. Keep it super simple. If I'm having to wear this when I'm out fishing, I'm thinking about cold spots. And if I'm sweating, then I'm thinking about hot spots. And if I'm doing neither, then I look for food.
I'm looking
But
for a beer. I thought you were going to say beer.
uh,
Uh,
if I'm catching fish, I still have
oh,
the rule where
oh,
no beer to catching fish.
okay.
But yeah, so on the cold spectrum, right? We know they're cold after a big cold front comes through. We know they're going to be on the cold side. They're not comfortable, and they're going to be trying to get more comfortable. And so what they're going to do is they're going to start swimming around looking for warmer water, and they'll naturally gravitate towards or really into the warmest pockets of water within whichever area they're living in. They're not going to swim 20 miles to go find like a spring, like up in some parts of Florida has natural springs where it's always 72 degrees. What they're going to do, let's just say there's a bay, there's a round bay. What they're going to do is they're going to move around and keep moving until it gets, until it stops getting warmer, and then they're going to stop. And ideally, there's going to be some structure, right? If there's some structure, that's a huge bonus, especially if they're dolphin in the water. Like I just a couple of days ago, after a really big cold front, I caught a really good day with redfish and snook, in spite of it being cold. But there were so many dolphin around, and it was very low tide that the fish were actually pushed up shallow because they were terrified of the dolphin that were pummeling them if they got away from the trees. So look for the structure, but ideally find deep structure. That's really the key takeaways. Find some deep water, and ideally some water that has some form of structure, whether it's rocks, oysters, mangrove roots, bridges, right? The bridge pilings are excellent. Anything other than flat sand is often going to hold some fish. In that deeper water, the reason why deeper water is good is because that there's just more buffer zone between that really cold air and then the water at the bottom, right? Like up in the shallows, like shallow flats, like the summer spots, where like an early morning I'd be throwing top water on a shallow flat. I would never fish that on after a cold front, because those fish in that shallow water gets zapped by the coolness. They're going to push off deep, and they're not going to be active enough to swim up to the surface to strike. So I've already hung up my top waters for quite some time.
Yeah, so that is tip number one, or trick number one. If you guys didn't catch, I don't think you actually said this is trick number one, but it's to go deep, right? And that doesn't mean, inlets and passes per se. Like, remember, we found some really cool things, just like going out and paddleboard way back in the backcountry, and you might be in 2 feet of water, and all of a sudden there's that one little deep pocket where all that water has been pushed out, and all of a sudden it goes from 2 feet to 5, and all the snook are like just piled in there. There might be 30 or 40 of them in there, and I think you use the term relative, right? It's relative temperature, relative depth. So it's deep relative to everything else around it, and all the fish were in that one little spot. So it's just
Yeah,
find deeper areas relative to where all the fish are, or usually are.
yeah. If the general area, right, if the general area is average of 2 feet deep, then finding a 4 foot little trench, or even a pothole for that matter, is gold. A gold mine. I mean, you can literally catch it, because when you find those good spots, normally this is the 90-10 rule, where at any point 90% of the fish are in 10% of the water. During the winter, especially after the cold fronts, it's like 98-2 rule. So it's actually tough for people like what we used to be, who don't know how to predict where they're going to be. It's hard to find them, because they're going to be in small bunches. I shouldn't say small bunches. They're going to be in bunches, but there's going to be a lot of them. So when you do find them, that's why I love wintertime fishing. Now that am just better able to predict where they are, you can have a field day, and you're not sweating all day, which is and you don't have to wake up early. Another bonus. So yeah, but yeah, find that deep water. If it's just anything deeper than the norm is generally good, especially if it has structure. But if the average depth is like 5 feet of water, now I'm looking more for like 8 to 10 range.
That's great. Yeah, they're like a little bonus Jonas there. All right, so that's trick number one. Number two is to slow her down, right? And this is why, if you guys have ever fished a Ned rig, both freshwater and saltwater, it works great in both. It's just a very slow moving. Yeah, it's not as exciting as ripping a paddle tail through, or ripping a topwater, through a patch of grass around a piece of structure. But these fish they do eat, but they are a little bit more lethargic. So let's talk about that on why to go slow, and maybe even some of your favorite lures to use, and how you're rigging them and retrieving them in the wintertime.
Yeah, so going slow is huge, and this is my personal favorite. This is for those just listening. It's the Prawn Junior. This is a 3.5 inch shrimp lure. It has the great profile of a shrimp, but it's and there's really nothing super fancy other than just a great profile and a good glide in the water. But more importantly, again, keeping it low, is put it on a jig head and get it on the bottom. This is not the time to like do a fast retrieve like a scared shrimp up near the surface. This is get it on the bottom, and to the point where you can literally just drag it on the bottom if you want. So you can bouncing is great, dragging's great. Key is to get it low, get it on the bottom, and make sure that you're not ripping it through. Keep it at a slow movement, either dragging or slow bounce. Because those fish, they're not going to chase down. They're not going to swim 5 feet to get a meal. But if this thing just sits right in front of their face and is looking just so slow that they can't help but to go eat it, they'll give it a swipe. So yeah, make sure to slow things down and keep it on the bottom as much as possible, which kind of
Now,
leads to number three.
yeah, and before we get to number three, I would say don't even be afraid to let it just sit there, meaning like don't do anything for a couple seconds. You've been to the farmhouse, my wife's family's farmhouse up in Georgia before. They have a couple ponds there, and not huge bass, but a lot of bass and very clear water most of the year in these private ponds. And you can watch the fish as they come hit your lure. And in the summertime, spring, even fall, they'll kind of crush anything that you're any kind of swim bait. But in the winter, they will not touch it. And I'll watch it. I'll take you to that prawn junior, or even just a Ned rig, and I'll cast it out there, and I could watch this whole thing. Right, we're only talking 4 feet of water and super clear, and I'll literally let it sit there so it's on the bottom, and I'm just barely moving the rod tip with my hand, and so it's making just a little bit of motion, and all the bass kind of slowly come up to it to check it out. And I'll make a little bit more motion, and one of them every time will attack it. But if I try to rip something fast, they don't. They're too lethargic. They're just like, I'm not worth my energy to go get it. But when I have that thing just sitting on the bottom, I watch it. We catch so many fish in the wintertime doing that. So don't be afraid to go really slow, right? Is we've had different guests on the podcast before. They're like, it's almost the point it's uncomfortable slow. That's how slow you're retrieving because it does feel off.
Yeah, but if my only caveat to that is if you know there's fish there, that's when you can go super slow. But if you're out kind of patrolling, then you don't want to go super slow in an area that has no fish.
Yes.
So I typically go slower than the other seasons until I catch something, and I know there's like a trough, like with a weed line in a trough, or like the deep side of an oyster bar, knowing that there's a bunch of fish there, that's when I really slow it down. But make sure to not go too slow where you can't cover water. Because just as always, right? Even if you have like the perfect scenario where there's a nice deep pivot, deep trough that we're talking about that has structure, if a dolphin just ran through there, or if there was a boat has been sitting on it for the past 4 hours and you just happen to get there right after them, they're just not going to be feeding. They're not going to be there. So yeah, don't go so slow that you kind of get stuck in a dead zone for longer than you should.
Amen to that. All right. So now number three, you kind of already kind of let the cat out of the bag, but it's slow. So we go deep and then slow and low. I think there's a song about that. If anyone can name it in the comments, you win 10,000 bonus points. But low, right? Meaning, and we kind of already talked about it, but it's a great way to think about wintertime fishing in general. Let's go to deeper water and slow and low. So what does low mean to you?
Yeah, low just means keep it on the bottom. Keep it either on the bottom, keep it very low as you can. You can't go lower than the bottom, so keep it either on the bottom or at least very close to the bottom, because that's where those fish are going to be, right? Especially if if it's really cold and if there's dark bottom, that bottom, just the fact that it's dark, which in most cases it will be, is going to hold more heat than otherwise. So that very bottom is typically going to be the warmest water, and that's even where they feel more protected. That they don't have to look down for danger, right? They're at least on the bottom, and we know they're going to be more lethargic than usual. So the odds go to us if we keep it low and slow, get it on the bottom. As I mentioned before, yes, top waters can work during the summer in specific instances, but it's rare. And just to keep the odds in our favor, just I would say for most anglers, unless you're again something very unique, go with something like a small jig like this, get it on the bottom, work it slowly, and then once you get a pocket of fish, then work it like super slowly and have and just make the best out of the pocket of fish, all the pockets of fish that you find. Because
So
yeah,
let's
we did some podcast think it was last winter or maybe the winter before over in St. Pete, and we literally anchored down. So we had the power pole down. We were on a grass flat near a channel, and there was a deep hole. We could see it. We could see the white hole. We literally sat on that one hole. It was maybe 20 feet in diameter at the widest point. And I can't remember how many trout we caught from, but it was like 30, maybe more. I can't remember. All on like a live feed, just going out fishing. And we just kept throwing back in that pocket and just slow bouncing it through there. And it was getting slammed by trout. It was so much fun.
Yep.
And when you use the online maps for clear water, you can use the satellite views like smart fishing spots. That high res is invaluable for finding those deep pockets. And then for areas like the people in the Carolinas, further north, or even in Texas where the water is more murky, the 1 foot contour layer within smart fishing spots is an excellent way to find those deeper ledges and the deeper troughs to just to help make sure that you can as easily as possible find a ton of spots to fish during the winter months.
I love it. All right, so let's turn this into a song, right? So everyone remembers it. So get down, slow and low. I get down, slow and low. Try it, Luke. I get down. Ah. Yeah.
You lost me. You
All
lost
right.
me on that.
In terms of bottom, what is your favorite type of bottom? Meaning structure, mud, sand, dirt, Joe Dirte. What's your favorite type of bottom in the wintertime to fish
Yeah,
in
you've
general?
you've been through the fishing school, so I think you know the answer to this. That was a leading question, but yeah, it's mud. So mud is the best material to find, particularly if you're fishing backwaters. Mud is going to be darker almost always, right? Mud's darker than sand. It's also softer, and so that dark mud will attract more heat during the sunlight hours, and it'll actually hold on to it. So mud holds heat longer than sand. So I mean, scientifically, it is almost always going to be warmer than any sand pockets. So finding a good like cove with mud, soft mud, even better, is oftentimes going to be those little sanctuary, those little warm. I won't say they're warm, but they're less cold sanctuaries for those fish when that water is super cold. And that's why like I've already started switching. This is a new color that we've started called the Turd Ferguson.
It's a funny
Funny
name.
name, but it's really designed to blend to really match the mud, right? And in all seasons, in all situations, the tastiest of prey almost always will blend in with the bottom. Like think of an octopus, right? That's like the ultimate, or squid. All the even fish and shrimp, they'll get darker and lighter depending on what bottom contour they're near. And so now knowing that a lot of the predators are going to be holding on mud, when I'm trying to imitate a bottom dweller, and this is actually one of my other favorite lures for the winter. I'm going to be throwing a lot of turd Fergusons around here. And actually this is what I caught a really nice snook with after that cold front. But yeah, low and slow is the biggest thing. Keep it on the bottom. Generally keep your lure size smaller. I've never been a fan of the Ned rigs personally. They're almost like too small. Like sometimes they're like 2.5 inches. I still like to be like the 3.5 to kind of weed out the smaller stuff, but and to get a little bit more attention. But as long as you're in a good spot, it's the lure. As long as you're keeping the lure down in the right zone, you should be getting some good results.
Hmm. Cool. Anyone who made it this far, we should probably tell them the exciting news that you just discovered today on the line, and we'll
Yeah,
obviously put the full video out there. But yeah, if someone made it at the end, let's give them a little preview. Kind of
yeah. So
exciting.
thanks for sticking around. So I was doing some knot tests, and I made a tweak to the trilene knot that I believe was better, and so I was testing it. And I pulled the spool of line that's been in my tackle bag that I use for leader. I just use 20-pound mono, and I use the bulk spool just to save money. I have like that 300-yard spool, and I keep it in a koozie so it doesn't go all over the place. And so that line's been in my tackle bag for like a year and a half or whatever. So it's getting super hot, getting cold. The temperature changes, and the breaking strengths were weaker than I was expecting, like weaker than normal for a 20-pound line. The breaking points were like at 13 and 15 pounds. I was like, what is going on here? So I started thinking, I was like, man, maybe this line sitting in my tackle bag has just gotten weak. and degraded given that the exposure to hot and cold and just not being in a temperature controlled environment. So this morning I went and bought a brand new spool. I went to this tackle store, bought a brand new spool, and yes, the new spool was better. So that was pretty cool. But during the test, when I'm doing these tests, I always like to do the using saliva versus not using saliva. So wet, dry, and I go back and forth. Let me pull up the stats. But what I found that the old line, so using the Orvis knot, which is my favorite, the the old line was 5% degraded compared to the new line. So if you have line in your tackle bag or garage, right, anything other than a temperature controlled environment, you can expect, at least given this, we can expect line degradation up to about 5%. I also use the uni knot, and that was only 1% worse. But in both cases, I had probably broke 30 knots today. The older line consistently underperformed the new line. But what was most interesting is that using saliva made it worse, made it, I guess, made a bigger impact to the negative than using an old line. So, so when I'm getting my stats here. So on the the non-saliva for the Orvis knot was 6% better than the using saliva. So like that whole having to wet the line before you cinch your knot is not only not true, it's the exact opposite and a much bigger impact than I thought. And so with the uni knot, the the saliva, so using saliva to cinch down the uni knot, the average after 6 runs was 16.4 pounds. And with the no saliva, it was 18.72. So that was over 2 pound difference on average. The uni knot was better when I did not use saliva. And that's consistent. I can't remember. I did a test like 2 years ago, and the saliva underperformed no saliva for both mono and fluoro.
What
And
do you
this
think the
case, I was just
reason?
testing.
What do you think the reason is?
From there was I read a study on it now probably 5 years ago, but it used to be true back in the day when the manufacturing process wasn't as good. So the mono and fluoro lines, but the lines were not as smooth. Like the outside line wasn't very smooth. So when you did constrict the line, it would kind of burn itself and harm itself. Now those lines, the manufacturing is just so good. Those lines are just super smooth and sleek so that when we put saliva on it, now it doesn't cinch properly. Like now it's gonna skip a like in the uni knot. That's I think why the uni knot was such a big difference because it has those coils. I was doing 5 twists on all of them, and so those coils just don't constrict naturally when there's so much lubricant that it can just go wherever it wants. So either way, it's just consistently been shown that not using saliva is a benefit for strength, and it's also a benefit of not having spit on your hands. So yeah, anybody who's using saliva for their mono or fluoro lines, definitely recommend stop doing that.
Cool. Well,
For
stay
braid, it was
tuned.
different. So for braid though, for braid it actually got a little bit better from that test from years ago. I need to redo that one to get better stats though, but
Yeah,
pretty crazy.
that is crazy. Well, yeah, we'll have all the details and the full videos up on YouTube and our blog page. So stay tuned for that. But if you made it this far, we want to give you a little bit of a heads up. Be the first
Yeah,
to
and
know.
all this stuff is in the fishing school as well. So we have the fishing school that talks about the best knots to use and the best lines for your skill level. Or if you're a beginner, just to go out, just keep it easy. And then for the more advanced people to go through like the actual best of the best knots. I've literally tested every knot that I can find and multiple times. I can't count how many times I've broken knots, but there is a big difference on knot strength, and it's not the knots are pulling. It's different knots have different abilities to handle tension, and that advanced one goes through the best of the best to make sure that every connection you have is as strong as possible.
Love it.
All
Cool.
available on our site.
Stay tuned for more. If you have questions, let us know down below. Otherwise, come join us in the Insider Club if you haven't already. Got some big, exciting news for 2025, and also this month too, giving away some really cool stuff. So make sure to be active in the community. That automatically gets you entered in to the giveaway. Where just give away a trolling motor and some coolers and some pretty big ticket items. So doing that every single month, just for being active, meaning commenting, posting, sharing, being helpful in the private insider community there. That's at saltstrong.com. And we'll see you there. If you're not a member, you can also go to saltstrong.com to join. So any last words, Luke? Anything? No?
That covers it.
Cool. Does the knot stuff, does that apply to flat earthers as well? Is that a different
To
thing?
what?
Flat earthers, people who believe the earth is flat, or
Oh
is it?
yeah, I can't help in that. I can't help
Okay.
in that
Okay.
category.
I didn't know if you did or not. So cool. All right, guys, we appreciate you and talk to you on the next episode.